Well, sometimes what's happened is that people get stuck behind a big, long list of controversy, and then you say, no, we're going to continue.
I'm calling the order the Thursday, July 26th, 2018 meeting of the Mashpee Conservation Commission. Is there anyone in the audience tonight who has an item they'd like to bring to our attention which is not currently on the agenda? Seeing none. Drew?
I didn't get a chance to review the last set of minutes, so we'll have to table that for August 9th. Next item up is as you know, I had proposed some language changes to Chapter 172, Regulation 27 for docks, piers, and floats. And you should all receive a copy. There were some minor edits I had made, nothing that changed anything of substance, but I'll pass them out if you want to take a look at them. It's essentially the same thing
As we saw
before.
3 weeks or so.
Just to kind of review, there were some, most of the sections, it was just a matter of reformatting the whole regulation to kind of make it easier to read and cite and reference. So you've got the preface, which just kind of sums up the regulation. That was a bit reworded a bit to make it a little more comprehensive. Statement of jurisdiction under Section 1, restrictions, mostly dealing with ACEC designations in Wequoit Bay and other areas associated with Wequoit Bay, as far as a moratorium on docks in those areas. Just to point out, that's nothing new. That's just kind of reiterating that. That's been in place since 1997.
Say, Drew, just I see that that's on your agenda for 6:30.
Yes, yes it is.
Probably shouldn't get too far.
We can,
into that.
yeah, we can table that for the end of the meeting.
Okay.
You have time for anything else, or?
Yeah, I think so.
Just an update, Caitlin and some members of the Department of Natural Resources have been in attendance at the Barnstable County Fair all week. They set up a table with information about the Land Stewards Program, about the importance of planting native pollinator species, and they've had really good turnout. They're in a tent that's, other nonprofits and government organizations at the Barnstable County Fair. And Caitlin put together a really nice PowerPoint presentation that goes over the Land Stewards Program and pollinator plants that she had scrolling on a monitor the entire time. So even if people weren't, engaged with staff, they could watch that as well. And there were some live exhibits. I think DNR had a tank with crabs, and one of the crabs actually molted its shell during during that time. So. But overall, she said it was very successful. Tonight's the last night they're going to be there, so they won't be there tomorrow night. And yeah, she said it went very well. It's a great way to get information out about the Land Stewards Program. So it's a good, and we have an intern who comes in 1 day a week who is looking to get more experience in public outreach for environmental education. So this was kind of, a collaboration of the intern's idea and Kate's idea to do this. So great, it turned out really, really great. So.
Is there a similar program in Falmouth, given the county event? So any other towns have a similar Land Stewards Program?
Falmouth has that 300 committee, and they're kind of associated with the town, but I don't think Falmouth has an actual Land Stewards Program with the Conservation Department. Mm-hmm. But the 300 committee is essentially the same thing as our Land Stewards Program, but it's a 501c3 nonprofit.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So we'll we get on to the other items after the
Sure.
rest of the agenda is gone through. We're going to open the 6 o'clock hearing for David Edlin, 5 Bowswick Point. This is proposed removal of 5 diseased hazardous trees. It's an RDA. If you could come up and identify yourself for the record.
Good evening, David Edlin. Thank you for hearing our request. I'm a resident of 5 Bowswick Point, and property owner there for 22 years. And I'm asking permission to remove 5 very tall pitch pines on the right border of the property, right next to the house, that we believe are a safety and a hazard to the home. They are also trees that have been weakened and stressed by disease. So that is our proposal. We look forward to your questions.
So I did meet with the homeowner on site and looked at the trees up close and personal. You can see some of the images here, the home borders, Pompanesett Creek. This is one of the trees here. It's a little difficult to see, but there are flags on it. It's leaning towards the house. They're all pitch pines. This one's probably at about the 100-foot mark from the water. And then these are the 4 other trees in a little side garden area within about 50 to 60 feet of the water. Again, you can see this one's kind of leaning towards the house. All trees have evidence of southern pine beetle, borer beetle. You can see the lot of sap coming out from roughly 4 feet up and below, which is typical of the southern pine beetle infestation. So I would certainly recommend removal, because if any one of them were to come down, they would strike some portion of the house or the landscaping or both. And I believe I had spoken with you about this on site. It said if the trees are to be, if the commission approves it and the trees will be removed before October, you want to make sure the stumps are grinded out, because it will continue to release pitch, and that could attract more beetles, which could attract more trees nearby. So the general rule of thumb in forestry when it comes to these types of pests is if you're going to cut the trees prior to the fall, which is usually late October, around that time period, you grind out the stumps, because that pitch will continue to be released, and that's attracting the smell for more beetles to come into the area. So stumps should be grinded out if the work is going to happen before the end of October.
And that is our plan.
Yeah.
To grind out the stumps
Yeah.
with a local arborist.
Okay.
Any questions or comments from the audience?
I would motion that we approve the proposed removal of the 5 trees from 5 Bowsbrook Point.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Okay, good to go.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Opening the 6:03 hearing, South Wolf Cape Development LLC, 0 Sampson Hill Road. This is for the proposed construction of a retaining wall, stormwater bioretention area, a small portion of a townhouse, riprap apron, and associated grading work. An RDA.
Good evening, my name is John Liddell from Dash9 Engineering, representing the applicant. There's a proposal to put in 11 townhouses consisting of 2 units each. The site fronts on the Santo River, about 1,000 square feet. The project is essentially moved as far away from the river as we could, but there is a small amount of work that's within the outer riparian zone. A small portion of one of the units falls within that zone, as well as some grading and a portion of a retaining wall. The project meets the Mashpee zoning bylaw for stormwater, as well as the stormwater management policy. This project here allowed 9,800 square feet of disturbance in the riparian zone, and this project only has approximately 3,000 square feet of disturbance within that zone. So the impact to the wetland resource area is minimal. So with the minimal disturbance there, there'll be some sedimentation controls put in prior to construction. And we're looking for a negative determination with the starting 859.
So just to kind of review what the location, this is, the Sancho River kind of follows this pink line here. This is Barnstable over here. It's kind of makes up the town line between Mashpee and Barnstable in this location off Sampson's Mill Road. This is the parcel outlined in yellow that's owned by Willow Bend. And it's in this outer riparian area from the riverfront. Riverfront is 200 feet. Inner is 100, outer is 100 to 200, so this is exclusively in the outer. As he just mentioned, it's minimal intrusion and below the threshold for development within the outer riparian zone. So performance standards for riverfront, generally speaking, if there's not any pre-existing non-conforming structures within the inner riparian, that the inner riparian remain completely undisturbed, which is the case here. As part of the development, they do have stormwater control protocols as part of the packet that you have in the application, which calls for stormwater management, riprap, and the typical, stormwater management infrastructure that goes along with any sort of planned subdivision or housing areas. So meets all the performance standards for riverfront. And is there any, just out of curiosity, is there natural heritage jurisdiction in this area?
Well, they have jurisdiction, but there's no habitat.
Okay. Okay, so it's not priority, it's not labeled as priority habitat.
These units would be connected to the Willow Bend septic system?
Yes, it'll be on town water and gravity flow to the wastewater treatment plant that Willow Bend has on site.
Are there any questions or comments from the audience?
Are there any issues that cross town lines here?
No. No, it's exclusively on the Mashpee side.
Completely in the Mashpee side?
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, you can see the property line here. This is the river right here.
Right.
This is the edge of property, but the outer riparian is over here.
Right.
So it's well outside of the town boundary.
Do I have a motion then?
I would move for a negative determination in regards to the application of Southworth Cape Development LLC at 0 Sampson's Mill Road.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Okay, you have a negative determination.
Thank you very much.
Opening the 606 hearing. This is the Town of Mashpee, Department of Public Works, 0213 Sampson's Mill Road. It's a proposed culvert replacement and road work on the right of way. It's an NOI.
Good evening. For the record, I'm Amanda Poole with Ty and Bond, and I'm joined this evening by Robert Laurent, the director of the Mashpee DPW. We're here this evening focusing on an existing culvert in Sampson's Mill Road that conveys the Santuit River. It was assessed by Western and Sampson in 2016 and found to be in failing condition. It's an approximately 22.5-foot long crossing, and the inlet is a 3-foot diameter cast iron pipe that then halfway into the crossing connects into a box culvert. So it's a very untraditional model together shape, and the box culvert itself is stone masonry, and the stones are starting to collapse, and it's just not a safe structure. And the box culvert is about 5 feet wide. There's no head wall on the upstream side. There's a little bit of erosion there, and then the downstream side has a dry laid stone head wall where a lot of stones are starting to pull out, and that is also failing as well. The town actually received grant funding from the Commission of Ecological Restoration to replace this culvert, provided that it was replaced in compliance with the river and stream crossing standards, which will promote stream continuity and habitat improvements, which is particularly important for this as it's a cold water fishery, and we do see run bird trout in the area. So
providing a larger, more appropriate crossing will really improve the ecology of this area. That will tie in nicely to a lot of the restoration projects that have occurred both upstream and downstream of the system. The wetland areas were actually flagged by Agent McManus in March of this year. We have BBW, Inland Bank, riverfront area, and the coastal flood zone. There's no natural heritage. And so it's just basically a brief overview of the resource areas we're dealing with. We will be working within riverfront area, flood zone, land underwater, bank. A lot of these impacts will be temporary, and we are, although through this project, but we are anticipating to have a net gain in land underwater through the installation of a larger crossing. So the town is proposing to replace this 5-foot wide box culvert with a 14-foot span. We did H&H analysis and looked at a lot of different crossing alternatives, all of which would meet the stream crossing standards. But we found that this size would be most appropriate just to convey floodwaters and maintain the hydrology of the stream. So it will be a 14-foot wide open bottom structure on pedestal footings. The 5-foot pedestal footings will be recessed into the substrate so that they won't in any way alter the natural substrate of the stream. So we'll provide additional habitat value there. And the footings will be installed separately in the dry, so we will be installing coffer dams and temporarily dewatering these areas. And we will have a dewatering system, so anything that is pumped out will be filtered before it's discharged back into the system if it is turbid. We're also proposing to install turbidity curtains to also protect any sort of sediment suspension downstream of that system. And with that open bottom structure, because it's a three-sided bridge, we'll have a natural substrate within the stream that mimics both the upstream and downstream conditions, that habitat continuity. And we will be installing concrete block head walls on the upstream and downstream sides. So they'll just be sort of an in-kind replacement of the head wall on the downstream side, with the addition of a head wall will be new on the upstream side, but they will provide for a lot of scour protection and really help protect the roadway. And as we're having to open up the roadway to replace this culvert, we will be needing to resurface the roadway and regrade it slightly, and we will be putting in some minor stormwater management practices. And with that, it's pretty much just an overview of what's going on, and I just turn it over to the commission for questions.
So you aren't going to have any alternate traffic paths in that area while you're working on it?
I would like to defer to background on traffic management. I believe there might be.
Yes, because as Amanda explained, we are replacing the culvert under the entire roadway. As we did when we had a similar project at Tristan Avenue, I anticipate that we'll be detouring traffic during the culvert replacement. The project does include resurfacing of the road. Anyone familiar with the area knows we have been doing that over the last several years. We basically stopped at the driveway for the maintenance garage for Little Bend. So that entire section of roadway from that driveway for the maintenance garage going down the hill to the river will be resurfaced and drainage installed along that entire span. So there will be detours associated with that work as well. The town of Barnstable is a partner in this project. They have not as extensive improvements proposed on their side of the river, but they are also looking at doing some stormwater improvements as part of this project as well.
I did have a question on the notice of intent. I saw that DMF box was turned out not applicable. Don't they consider this to be a fish run? Or are they talking about ladder structures?
It was more for ladder structures and immediate
So
coastal environments, but
fish.
I'm happy to provide more copy.
Probably a good idea, just in case the scope of that fish run includes rivers instead of just the
I'll copy you
actual
when I
fish.
correspond.
Yeah, I mean, I can imagine that their comments would be, fairly positive about the whole approach. And it's not a natural heritage.
No,
Surprising.
it's not.
Very surprising.
I've checked several times, not believing it myself.
That's interesting.
That is amazing.
Yeah.
You consider the fish run?
I thought all rivers would be automatically, some portions would be under there, at least estimated habitat, if not priority. but apparently not. And I know that, looking at the top right photo, you can't tell, but those are several large boulders that are outside the culvert. Is there a plan to, is there anything to address that, or, because I know that that's, depending on water flows from one year to the next, that could be an impediment or a benefit. But was there anything in the project scope? Because I think those probably came from under the culvert at some point.
I don't believe there is anything in the design discussion that I've seen that addresses that, but if you have
Okay.
concerns about retaining or removing them,
Yeah, it's just
that's
something.
we can certainly explore.
Yeah, and maybe marine, that's another, maybe marine fisheries could weigh in on that. Their local guys who have helped to.
I would imagine with a larger crossing opening, that'll help dissipate
It'll
the flow a
help
little bit, so
dissipate,
you're not
yeah.
gonna have as high of velocities as you have through this restricted
Right.
situation.
Yep.
Um,
Yeah, I would imagine it should be fine. I just wasn't sure if that was part of the project scope or not.
Perhaps it could provide, resting in
Yeah.
places as well, so they could be good to retain.
Right, yep. So, yeah, this is a much needed upgrade in this area. Just this past year Santuit is a pretty prolific herring run. And because of the undersized culvert, when on water coming out of the south end of the culvert, really presented a serious impediment to herring passage this year because of the velocity. And there was some pretty significant mortality south of the culvert because of the undersized element and the water velocity coming out. They just couldn't get in. So it's definitely can present an impediment to fish passage depending on the water flows. And as was already described, it's an outdated structure in general. So opening it up as a box culvert will greatly improve the flow and the conditions for the anadromous fish run. There's a lot of widening of the river just north of it, a lot of sediment buildup, so that sediment will be free to move further downstream now, improve the cold water fishery, and improving the velocity of sediment movement. That will also help to improve the water temperature to make it more conducive to brook trout. I'm sure you all remember the previous application, or there was more of an update from Justin Fleming of the Sea Run Brook Trout Coalition, they had done some stocking here, taken some out of the Mashpee River, some native brook trout to try and reestablish the population in the Santuit because it had been claimed to be extinct. Although it's not, they weren't 100% sure of that, but this will greatly, improve conditions on the river, so future efforts like that will stand a better chance of success. Right now, it's just a difficult situation, water temperature-wise.
Will the order of conditions specify a time frame of when this work can be done, considering it could impact
Well,
flow?
that's another reason why DMF, I wanted them
I can
to,
speak
they
to
should
that.
weigh in, because I'm sure they're gonna have a time of year restriction.
They
We
will
would
have a time,
of
the
year.
Army Corps as well, we filed with the Army Corps, and they also established time of year restrictions.
Yeah.
However, DMF has a different one. They often refer to DMF in keeping
Okay.
their local fisheries knowledge. But we
Yeah.
will certainly be adhering to that.
During that herring run season, obviously, that's gonna be restricted, so.
They don't hand out waivers for those
Right.
late days.
So Drew, you're satisfied that this project, both in scope and time frame, minimizes the impact on migratory species?
Yeah, absolutely.
But does the order condition that, or I guess I'm hearing that it's, those time
I would,
restrictions aren't in there?
if another agency doesn't already recommend it, I would put it in place. I would, make that recommendation to have a time of year restriction for the construction, which would essentially be in the winter, late fall, winter.
Is that something we need to condition?
Yeah, yes.
Okay, so we'll be considering passing on this with the understanding you won't release the orders, issue it until you have those dates, is that?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say that I need to wait to hear from Division of Marine Fisheries. I mean, it's essentially late March to mid to late October is the general time frame of when you want that time of year restriction.
Right.
So I don't need to wait from DMF to put that in as a
Okay.
condition.
That could be modified, but had to be as.
Yes, yeah, and we can have
If you look at
that wording.
Massachusetts general permits as well,
Is-
the
yeah.
Army Corps, that since they just released the 2018 version, they have the revised time of year
Okay.
restriction for
It's
non.
always
Yeah, it's
differs from year to
ballpark.
year depending on how much rain we get, so.
Maybe we can condition this on the satisfaction of the conservation agent with the timeframe of the project.
That'll work.
Do I have any comments or questions from the audience?
I would move that we close an issue in regards to the application of the town of Mashpee, Department of Public Works, in regards to Sampson's Mill Road, with the added conditions that the time frame associated with the species that run in that river will be honored.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Thank you.
Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Opening the 609 hearing for Edward J. Mara, 39 Pantana Road. This is for the proposed planting of native shrubs and herbaceous perennials. At the request of the commission, this was continued from 6/28 for a revised landscape mitigation plan. So I assume the continuance was requested by the applicant. The commission wanted them to submit a revised landscape mitigation plan.
Don't think they didn't submit anything to the office so far. We didn't want to continue it until we were absolutely sure that whether or not they were going to show up, and obviously they're not here. So I would suggest that we just grant a continuance on behalf of the applicant to August 9th, if you're okay with that. For whatever reason, something happened where they just weren't able to submit a revised plan before the meeting.
Do we have a time for that? Time slot?
Yeah, just one second. So August 9th at 6:06 p.m.
Okay, I would move that we continue the application of Edward J. Maher, 39 Uncatina Road, to August 9th at 6:06.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Continued.
Thank you.
Opening the 612 hearing, this is for Richard D. and Lisa M. McHale, 36 Wilson's Road. For the proposed hardscape and landscape modifications, it is an RDA.
Steve Leonard with Napa Landscape, Richard and Lisa on the project. The project entails a circular patio off the back corner of the deck, as well as a 5 by 10 sitting area off the slider, and then the seashell driveway.
Does everybody got the plans in front of them?
I can't find out.
This is 36 Wilson's Grove. Still have it?
No, I do not have.
No?
Wait a minute,
Oh,
wait a
there it
minute.
is. The one thing maybe perhaps the headline may not have been aware of, when you use another engineering firm's plan for a particular project, the commission can't accept the plan modified without written permission from an engineer to modify said plan. It's so, that's why I didn't put the plan up on the screen. So we will require a revised plan, or a letter from VSS Design saying they're okay use of their plans for another purpose. That's general rule across the board.
Yeah, I did speak with CSS.
You did?
Yeah, regarding that.
Okay, so they were okay. Can you provide written verification of that? We just have to file. Thank you. So just to review the location here, you've got, this is Wilson's Grove, part of Pompanesett Beach homeowner area in New Seabury. The property lies, I believe, partially within, is it Lansing coastal, in the flood zone, and partially within the setback, 100-foot setback to coastal dune in this area here. As you can see, though, from the photos, the entire property is pre-disturbed. Most of the area around Pompanesett Beach Association is pretty clustered housing, so there's not a lot of native vegetation. These are small, very small lots, so you just see a combined mix of Cape Cod lawn and sand and dirt around the perimeter. So the landscape and hardscape modifications will not have any adverse impact on coastal dune. They're not getting into the coastal dune area, and the lot is too small. It's under 10,000 square feet for any sort of Regulation 25 requirements under land subject to coastal flow under the bylaw. So Everything is meets the performance standards. Just need a revised, a letter from BSS Design.
So we aren't increasing the impermeable surface?
Well, there's no standards. I mean, it's under Regulation 25, it really goes by, there's no criterion for impervious surface. It's elimination of native vegetation or retention of native vegetation based on the square footage of the lot, which starts at 10,000 square feet. So lots that are smaller than that don't fall under that standard. And this is significantly smaller.
But this sitting area is going to be impervious. I mean, it's going to be pavers, but there's going to be drainage through the pavers, around the pavers.
Yeah, the patio will be going right outside the wall.
Right, but it's a pervious solution. I mean, it will drain through
Yes.
this.
And so is the driveway.
Yeah.
We don't anticipate any changes in drainage or nothing?
Not for this amount of area. I think there will be enough percolation through to not flood the road or anything.
Yeah, the road is flat.
It's pretty
Road
flat
is
road.
Pretty
It's-
flat road.
It's elevated too, so it doesn't experience the same as some of the low-lying areas.
Yeah, a couple of streets down would be a problem, but not there.
Okay, and we have the cards back from the butters. We have the cards back from the butters notices.
That's an RDA.
Okay, I would move for a negative determination in regards to the application of Richard D. and Lisa M. McHale at 36 Wilson's Grove.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Negative determination.
Okay.
Thank you.
The next one we don't have a quorum for.
I did ask to
Yeah,
seek some permission.
that's fine. We're gonna have to tell Raul. We don't have a quorum.
Is it Matt?
Raul.
Oh, well, I think you can call the hearing, but we have an issue with the lack of a quorum. One of the commissioners has been involved with this project in a
Okay.
different
So
project.
I'm opening the 6:15 hearing for Stuart J. and Leslie S. Frank, 22 Little Neck Lane. Proposed demolition, reconstruction of stairs, pier, ramp, and float. Unfortunately, because one of our members has to recluse himself for this one, we do not have a quorum, so we can't hear this evening.
So, on behalf of the applicant, I'll ask for 2 minutes.
Thank you.
So we have
August 9th?
August 9th at 6:09 p.m.
6:09. Okay. Move that at the request of the applicant that we continue this application till August 9th at 6:09 p.m.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
It is continued, and I apologize, but it does sometimes happen. We try to avoid it, however.
Okay. Moving on.
Yeah.
Waterway.
Opening the 6:18 hearing for Kenneth J. and Robin J. Nardini, 81 Waterway. The proposed addition of a garage, hardscape modification, construction of a retaining wall, and a septic system upgrade. This is also an RDA.
Thank you. For the record, my name is Tom Bunker, BSS Design.
We have it on the screen too, sorry.
Yeah. With BSS Design, we prepared this plan. So there's an existing house, 81 Waterway. It's actually on a slight rise of land, so the house itself is not in the flood zone, but the flood zone, AE Regulation 11 comes in from waterway, so the flood zone wraps around. Ours is built up on the high part of the lot right here, so the flood zone wraps around. And through some riprap, there's an area which could be considered coastal bank in this location. The 11 contour runs right through here now. What they want to do is add garage, which will be built also above the flood zone. So there'll be no flood vents or anything required. And to do that, I do a little bit of filling, the 10 contour, the 9 and the 8 contour. Leave a gravel driveway, same as it is now. And because the septic system, the tank is under this location, and we put in a new Title V compliant septic system here. The H20 septic tank here, the soil pipe will run out in the same location to a new septic tank and a new leaching field, which is the farthest back from the resource area waterway, which is way up there off of the screen. There is an area of native vegetation around the back. There's a deck which is being removed, and then a patio put in place here at grade, so that the lot coverage will not exceed the 20% by structures. There are several trees in this location to be removed, but otherwise not really any other native vegetation to come out. So proposing.
So just some photos of the existing site. As you can go back to the aerial. It is on the opposite side of our waterway from the waterfront homes. So as far as any setbacks from wetlands, land under ocean, any BBW or salt marsh area is well outside 100 feet from those resource areas. But as Tom mentioned, it's a portion of the lot is within land subject to coastal storm flow, and there may be some topography that qualifies as coastal bank by landform only. Just a couple of pictures of the existing conditions on the yard. This is the driveway configuration. Out here is where the proposed septic upgrade and garage proposed here. These are the trees that are tagged to be removed. Back there you can kind of see what the area to remain naturally vegetated around the backyard perimeter. Pretty straightforward. Board of Health has received application currently under review. Yeah, it does, plan does show, as you can see in that dotted kind of shaded area, what's to remain based on the square footage of the lot. 15% must remain in a naturally vegetated state, and that performance standard has been met for this particular.
Could I ask one question about that? Is 15% of the total lot area, 15% of the area that's within the flood zone?
That's a great question. It's a great question. Wish I had an answer for it, because I would assume by the way the regulation is written, it's referring to a whole lot wholly in the separate storm flow. So, yes, yeah, I would assume that's really what the context of that regulation. It's assuming the whole lot's within the flood zone. So, and in this case, it's only a portion of the lot. So, no other comments?
Any comments or questions from the audience?
I would move that we approve the proposed addition of the garage and hardscape modifications at 81 Waterway.
It is a RDA. So
Negative determination. I move for negative determination. Proposed addition for garage and hardscape modifications at 81 Waterway.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Negative determination? going to wait a moment so we have a sitting quorum. Opening the 621 hearing for Stephen F. and Donna M. McDonald, 126 Waiting Place Road. This is a proposed demolition, reconstruction of a single-family dwelling, installation of a swimming pool, a spa, and connecting boardwalk, a septic system upgrade, tree removal, and native vegetation planting. It is an NOI.
Thank you. Tom Bunker, DSS Design. Mike Picard of Sudbury Design, landscape architect, worked on this project also. 126 Waiting Place is, as you can see, is Waiting Place Road. Here it's existing house, lawn area, lawn. Here, it's like the stone revetment in this location and a fringe of salt marsh along the water on the uphill side of that stone area there. In this location, there's an isolated freshwater wetland here, and this area is in flood zone. Same flood zone as the other one, flood zone AE, elevation 11. It basically is through here, through the house, through here, through the house, and around and out. Here is the freshwater wetland here, the Spoondrift Cove, like this, the salt marsh running through here, the house. All of this down here is lawn running down to the edge of that marsh. There is pine, mainly pine trees, pitch pine through here, and there's some pine and gets into other deciduous hardwood type trees are down here around the wetland in this location. This vegetated buffer. This line is the 50-foot buffer to the wetland. There's a 50-foot line from the salt marsh, 100 from the salt marsh, and then through here and there. There are two septic systems on the site. One, the here and the overflow pit in this location. We're 30 some feet from the wetland. The main septic system is a tank and a leaching pit here, which is about 79 feet from the wetland. This tree is a honey locust. Liditia triacanthos enormous. Thornless honey locust here, not a native. We have a shed down here, about 8 feet from the wetland in this location. Another shed, a driveway, gravel driveway.
There you go.
And shed, driveway, and a circular driveway in this location. The house is 34. This edge of the deck here is 34 feet from the wetland. The house is 29.7 feet from the road. Non-conforming to zoning also in this location, 11.9 feet from the property line here. That is existing. That's the existing conditions. We have the new photo from the Board of Health at the time we filed this. We had a septic upgrade as a trench system, which Glenn gave a negative to since then, and hasn't been filed, but we've designed a newer system that will go in here. He has said it's a good system we have here that hasn't been filed yet. So we just did it earlier this week. But the proposal here is to add a house. There's this outline right here. There's a deck in the back, and a spa and a swimming pool, and there's some patio, which runs right down to the almost to the 50-foot setback from the marsh. And you see that's 34 feet, 34 feet. So the architect was careful to keep the house not closer to the wetland than the existing house in this location here, 34 feet. So that has been done. There will be some grading in this. There is some of the natural vegetation in this location, some grading. We replanted here. The regulation for 30% on this size lot, the natural vegetation must cover 30% of the lot. And so this existing area here running down and the existing salt marsh vegetation here, plus additional planting in this location and this location, will add up to the 30% requirement under the regulation 25. There will be, currently there are no dry wells. The water was just there yesterday, the runoff from the road, the sheet flow from down the driveway into there. There will be dry wells placed for the roof runoff. There will also be in this patio area, it's not detailed on this plan, but there will be drainage for this patio area. So to take that stormwater runoff, leach it under this proposed lawn area, there will actually be less runoff on completion with all the dry wells, and we'll add this will be a gravel surface also. We'll make sure because of this grading, it will not slope down as much toward there, so it's control runoff. There will be less runoff from the site on this area. This is a low grassy area, and certainly there's some concerns over too much runoff coming down here and contributing to the problem. So that will be reduced.
Mike Card, registered landscape architect with Sudbury Design. Just a couple of comments is the area of planting, the native planting along with the mitigation planting will be a benefit because we're connecting two resources together. Currently there's a lawn that runs and separates the two, so I view that as a very positive thing. We're also reducing the amount of lawn closer to the resource area, especially the waterway, which will therefore reduce nitrogen loading, etc. Tom mentioned there is currently a shed here, just to reiterate, that basically is about 8 feet off the wetland that will be removed. I view that as a very positive thing as well. A few more comments.
Just to show some photos of the existing site conditions. Got looking at the front yard, scattered pitch pines running the foreground before the driveway, house in the background. This is looking again from the street to the left side of the home. Some landscape plants, mostly in this area, surrounded by existing turf. Then over here on the right side of the home, the bottom left photo shows the close-up of the right side of the home. Got a perennial garden bed And then you've got this naturally vegetated area. You see the staking for the proposed garage. And then behind this vegetated area down slope is where that wetland is located. And then just another shot of the other side of the driveway, some of the septic work is proposed. And then looking out into the backyard, this is just coming down the right side of the home, looking out the backyard. There's the creek in the background. You can see some fringe BVW salt marsh behind that. There's the honey locust in the middle of the yard, and all the staking around shows the proposed hardscape features, pool, patio, spa. Again, just another angle looking out towards the yard, so you can see it's a pretty substantial area of lawn going from basically the back deck all the way out to the water and salt marsh. And the bottom right just shows what the existing conditions hold. Rock retaining wall, you've got some salt marsh behind it, and then very scattered, probably likely a high tide bush in this area here. So I did meet with Tom and Mike to go over the plan. I did have some input in regards to two features of the plan. So I'll go back to the proposed plan. The first one was this corner of the garage. There's a small corner of the garage that's staked out in that some of the portion of that proposed garage. And I say this with the understanding that they are pulling away everything in the revised plan to keep that same setback as existing. The only issue I had is that it does involve getting into this naturally vegetated buffer, which is, and you're already within 50 feet of that isolated wetland here. So I had asked if there was opportunity to kind of play with the footprint a bit to keep the garage, any portion of the garage out of that area. I understand there's going to be grading, site grading to go along here that's proposed to be replanted, but I just had an issue with the size of the garage and house combined necessitating clearing into this buffer strip. Just seeing if there was a way to reduce footprint to avoid getting into that area. The other suggestion that I had was in regards to the mitigation area, specifically over here. I don't have any problem with the calculations and the amount of mitigation. I think it's a very healthy amount of mitigation, and providing a connected corridor over here is great. I do feel though, and this is really coming from the regulation 12 on mitigation, is that mitigation should really provide a buffer fronting linearly the water body or wetland resource area. So my suggestion was to take this square footage over here and bring it out linearly across here so that you have a nice 20-foot wide buffer strip, further reducing lawn, where it really kind of gets closest to the resource area. So those are my two recommendations. As far as everything else that's proposed, I don't have a problem with it. It's, as you can see from the photos, it's entirely pre-disturbed right up to the water. It's a pretty common feature in a lot of Seabury homes. It is a very large structure that's replacing the existing home. Lots of additional hardscaping as well. But I just feel that those two aspects could be played with to kind of reduce any intrusion into a naturally vegetated area that borders an isolated wetland, and the other just to maximize mitigation more in accordance with what the regulation recommends.
So, Drew, you're stating that you would prefer that the footprint of the house was reduced or simply moved back?
Either the garage or house or whatever means necessary to keep that corner of the garage out of that naturally vegetated area. So whatever that would take, whether it's repositioning the garage, reducing some of the footprint of the home to push the garage out of that area, I don't know. That's just my recommendation, is that you're already within 50 feet of that isolated wetland. I just didn't want to see any further intrusion, and you've got a lot of footprint proposed here, so shaving that off didn't seem to be that big of a deal, or reducing somewhere to accommodate that.
Or spin the garage spin the garage so that you look a side load garage off of waiting.
And they can comment as to our
The
conversation.
only comment I would have to that is we would be closer to the road than currently, therefore further non-conforming. Along the road we're trying to be no closer than existing for zoning. The area in question, just to point out, is the garage is 88.5 88.2 square feet of garage footprint within the area that Drew was referring to. And in the calculations were based on where it is in the buffer zone, offering 2.5 times that in mitigation. So I see where Drew's coming from, but I also see we're actually giving 2.5 times what we're asking for in that area. And we're in full agreement with adding to the, up to the 20 foot along the waterway. Per his comment, that is something that
Good.
we
Okay.
are.
Takes care of that question.
Yeah, and I do, you know, that's what those, you know, the criterion of trade-off with mitigation. And this is not, my comment is not a reflection on what the homeowner will do moving forward. I just found that, you know, when you're dealing with greater amounts of mitigation, policing that can be an issue moving forward. Maybe not right off the bat, but years to come. You have to make sure that the mitigation doesn't get cut, pruned, or maintained like a landscape feature. It has to be natural. And that can be, you know, the larger the mitigation, the more difficult it can be to police. So where my train of thought was coming from is, you know, there's still going to be mitigation, whether you pull the garage out of there or not. But it just seems that, you know, it's a very large footprint house. And I think there should be some sort of accommodation to reduce footprint somewhere to get that 88.2 square feet out of the natural vegetative buffer. Maybe even reducing the house footprint and positioning the garage so that you're not getting into a zoning issue and forcing to move it closer to the street. That's another option that wasn't mentioned, but you know, they would have to seek variance from CBA.
Your issue is really with architecture. It's not with engineering, and it's not with landscape architecture. It's with building architecture, and I don't know if these gentlemen can respond to that. There's alternatives. You get a good architect in taking, I don't know who the architect is on this. If there has been, there must be an architect.
There's a good architect involved.
Yeah, and I'm sure that if an architect is challenged to come up with a redesign of how the garage is hung on that end of the house, I'm sure that they can respond with a creative way.
You know, part of what we have to consider is the precedent we set, why we make exceptions. And it's usually when somebody can't have a driveway unless we make an allowance or something to that effect. Where here, there's enough room and enough creative energy, I think, to meet the conservation agent's recommendations.
I would think that we continue for some period of time and allow the homeowner and their staff, so to speak, to come up with a creative solution that would reinforce your point, Drew.
How long do you feel you need?
We'll request a continuance. It'll have to be at least a month to go.
We have
We'll be away for the next hearing.
September 13th or September 27th.
September 27th.
There's August 23rd too, but I'm sorry, I forgot to mention, next hearing is August 9th, but August 23rd is an option as well.
August 9th, not the 23rd. 23rd, you're not going to be here.
I don't know if you will, but again, it's more of an architectural response.
Right.
Well, I'm just going to shift things appropriately.
Right.
So August 23rd for tentative, 6 o'clock, August 23rd.
Any comments at all from the audience, as long as we have the hearing open? Anybody here to want to weigh in on this?
Seeing the movement, then I would move that we continue the application of Stephen F. and Donna M. McDonald, 126 Waiting Place Road, to August 23rd at 6 p.m.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Opening the 624 hearing for Gooseberry Island Trust, 0 Gooseberry Island. The applicant is requesting a confirmation of wetland resource area boundaries. This is an NRAD, similar to an RDA.
Good evening. My name is Mark Manganello. I'm with LEC Environmental Consultants. Bunker from VSS Design is also here. VSS Design prepared the plans to accompany this ANRAD application. So we filed this ANRAD on behalf of Gooseberry Island Trust to confirm wetland resource areas on Gooseberry Island. I'll assume that you're all familiar with the location of the island. It's a 3.4 acre island. It has forested uplands primarily within the interior and is surrounded by wetland resource areas. So the boundaries that we're seeking to confirm include salt marsh, which extends around the perimeter, coastal bank, which also extends around the perimeter, bordering vegetated wetland, which is limited to a couple of narrow strips along the western portion of the island, and land subject to coastal storm flowage, which is, of course, the FEMA floodplain. So I delineated the BVW salt marsh boundaries back in April. Tom's office determined the coastal bank boundaries along with some input from a coastal geologist from my office. And, of course, the FEMA boundary is what it is, in essence. So that's really it in a nutshell. We're just seeking to confirm wetland resource area boundaries. There's no project proposed at this time. Just trying to nail down the resource area boundaries.
One of the things that I did discuss with the applicant was 2 additional resource areas that aren't shown on the plan that are relevant to the island, surrounding the island, and that's land under ocean and land containing shellfish. From my recollection of the previous RDA that was submitted for the same purpose, those I don't think they were labeled on that plan either. But when there was a proposal for the bridge to Gooseberry Island under notice of intent, there was a great deal of back and forth conversation about particularly land containing shellfish. We did receive a letter from Division of Marine Fisheries during that application that did deem the land around the island containing shellfish. I do understand the applicant hired a consultant, a wetland consultant, to do a shellfish survey, which turned out in accordance with DEP guidelines that did not turn up the numbers of land containing shellfish. But the letter from DMF and testimony from our own shellfish constable, Rick York, the commission did accept their designation as land containing shellfish. So the reason I bring up those 2 resource areas is to stipulate that if the commission were to approve this ANRAD tonight, it does not dismiss those resource areas moving forward, and we would condition that in the ANRAD determination. So just so, and I spoke to our counsel who agreed that this ANRAD, by not showing those resource areas, does not dismiss them moving forward.
Yes, we'd be comfortable with it if there was a condition or something that said it specifically does not confirm or.
Right, exactly. I just want to, for the record.
Yep, understood.
So, for the commission, because I know it's probably the first time you've seen an ANRAD before. It's not a very common filing, but it's a way to separate out delineation of resource areas in a given area. And I did walk around the entire island with the plan in hand, looked at all the flagging, and did agree that all the flagging that I saw and the identification of resource areas with, notwithstanding the aforementioned comments about land under ocean and land containing shellfish, is accurate. I don't have any other comments.
Shouldn't the plan that gets filed designate these 2 additional areas?
Well, I had asked about that, and it's of course your discretion if you wanted to see that on a revised plan. But council did say when it comes time, if you approve this ANRAD, for us to draft up the determination that we can condition that in language, and council said she would be happy to assist us draft that, mentioning that those 2 resource areas are present in the opinion of the commission and Division of Marine Fisheries and our shellfish constable, and therefore that would be satisfactory as far as any risk of them being dismissed moving forward if there were a future project on this piece of land. So I did confirm that just today.
Are there any questions or comments from the audience this evening?
Good evening, Chairman, members of the board, Mr. McManus, Ms. set. It's nice to see you all again. My name is Rebecca Salguero. I serve as legal counsel to the Mashpee Wampanoag tribe. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak tonight on this request. And thank you to Mr. McManus for pointing out what we consider to be a serious deficiency in the ANRAD, which is a very unique request to come before you, and the deficiency of not analyzing the land containing shellfish, which directly relates to the tribe's not only Aboriginal rights, but exclusive legal rights under a shellfish license that was issued to them over 40 years ago. If you recall, I've been before you several times in the past, although some members have changed. The applicant commenced their efforts to construct upon Gooseberry Island back in 2014. I know the ANRAD doesn't talk about a proposed development, but we know well that the proposed development is for residents or multiple residences on Gooseberry Island, and this would be a clear planning tool to head in that direction and just another step in that direction. So the tribe continues to strenuously object to any approval that would facilitate that construction in the future. I don't want to delve too much into the Shellfish Grant area because we've talked about it before, but this is a healthy, successful aquaculture farm that the tribe has conducted for over 40 years, if not for 12,000 years. The argument can be made. It's not only an asset to the tribe, but an asset to the town, and we've worked very closely with the Shellfish Constable. We've heard his testimony in the past, as Mr. McManus has mentioned. So because of the importance of this request, we have once again asked Horsley Witten, which we've engaged since 2014, to provide, and we respectfully request the ability to submit into the record a report, a peer review of the application before you. It notes many inconsistencies and discrepancies. It's my understanding that there are 3 different plans. There have been changes to the delineation of the coastal bank, and we think it's important for you to not only review the peer review report of Amy Ball from Horsley Witten, who will also be commenting and submitting the report, but also to perhaps under 53G consider a third-party review to analyze and provide a recommendation to the town on your own behalf. The tribe has spent its resources over the past couple of years to make sure that we can be part of the process, we can be on the record objecting, but we also think it's important to the town to have that analysis done on your behalf. Our second request would be for continuance. We think that the proposal is incomplete. There are issues, discrepancies, as I've stated before, and we ask you to please continue this matter to allow a review of our report and perhaps a third-party review, and to continue to work with Mr. McManus and the town and the applicant if necessary. Other than that, I won't take up any more of your time. I thank you very much for the ability to speak in front of you today and to be able to once again reiterate the importance of this to the tribe. And I'm going to allow Ms. Amy Ball to make some comments. Thank you.
Hi, good evening. For the record, I'm Amy Ball. I'm the senior ecologist with Horsley Witten Group. As Rebecca noted, the tribe has had Horsley Witten involved with this project site. It's not a project, but of the site since about 2014. We took a look at the ANRAD plan that is before you now and did a quick comparison of that plan to the previous plan that was submitted as existing conditions back in about 2014. And then also a comparison to the RDA plan that was filed December 2016, January 2017. We understand that has been withdrawn. But one of the things we noted that there were a few discrepancies that did not appear to be explained by this filing, discrepancies in the existing conditions. We have a letter that I'd like to submit for the record. As Rebecca also had said, the applicant who has the discretion to request approval of resource areas has requested for 4 resource areas. Mr. McManus has noted that the land under the ocean and land containing shellfish have not been included in this, and there are avenues to address that either now at the issuance of an ORAD or in the future. We also noted that from the comparison of these three plans and the existing conditions, that there appears to be an area of coastal dune that is disappeared from the sort of southwestern corner. In this case, it would be the lower left-hand corner on the plan. That there doesn't appear to be any explanation for that. And also any coastal beaches or tidal flats that were also previously identified. We fully recognize that we had a pretty rough winter this year. There were a lot of storms. Those act upon coastal resource areas and can make some changes. But then we also found that there were some differences in the contours that are shown in the plans that did not appear to be the same as previously. And again, there's a recognition that if this property were to have been resurveyed, that might have resulted in in some shifts in that. But because in particular it's on one side of the island where the contour shifts may have an impact on the delineation of the coastal bank, we feel that it'd be important for the commission to seek additional information from the applicant to quantify or clarify why these shifts have occurred. With respect to the coastal bank determination, the applicant has submitted 6 transects around the island, recognizing that there is coastal bank that fully encircles the island. But there are some changes in the delineation of the top of the coastal bank, particularly between transects E and F. E would be the one diagonally from sort of the western or left-hand side toward the center of the island, and the one on the bottom of the page. That there doesn't seem to be any substantiation or confirmation of why the top of the coastal bank suddenly shifts between contours in sort of an irregular way. We point this out, again, there is no project here, but this was the point of access for the previous project that is still under litigation. And we feel that it's in the Commission's best interest to make sure that all of these resource areas are accurately depicted on the island. That also lends to the coastal bank under the bylaw. It is not particularly well defined or labeled on the plans. There is some discrepancy between the coastal bank profiles on the second sheet of the plan set and a reference to the elevation of the 12-foot flood zone that we feel the Commission may wish to have some clarification on. That will affect the way the coastal bank is defined and shown on the existing conditions under your local bylaw. You know, to that end, we feel that, you know, the resource areas should be accurately shown on the plans. These would be, if approved under an ORAD, it would be approved for 3 years, and with little option for changing. The other question we had was regarding the stability of the coastal bank. This had become an issue at the original notice of intent filing. It was an issue during the RDA filing that, again, was withdrawn, but it does not seem to have any definitive reasoning behind it. And we feel that the Commission should maybe not make a ruling one way or the other under an ORAD as to whether or not the coastal bank is eroding or not eroding. As we look forward, we realize this is a planning tool. Any future project would be held to slightly different performance standards for a coastal bank if it is an eroding coastal bank versus a stable coastal bank. And that distinction is important to understand. And with that, I think I'm done with my sort of overview of the comments. With all due respect to Drew, as the conservation agent, has reviewed the resource areas, we think, given the history and the past history of this site, that the Commission, it would be in the best interest of the Conservation Commission to seek this additional information from the applicant. And perhaps because of everything that's been going on for the past 4 years, that the Commission may wish to invoke the 53G provision and have an independent resource area determination by an outside entity. and we're recommending that the commission invoke that. I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have of the report that we submitted. I realize you can't have just read it, but thank you for your time.
Drew, what, if any, of these materials have you received prior to this evening?
No.
I need to make one small comment with respect to the first request and some other comments you have made as part of your presentation, that there was considerable reference was made to prior events involving an NOI previously filed and still, I believe, under litigation at some level.
Yes.
It's not within the scope of the commission to revisit any of that in this hearing or with respect to this particular application. I just want to point that out to you. As to the accuracy of the documents that we've been presented, I would like to comment, my own opinion is that there is some reasonable level of accuracy which contour lines and the like can be drawn, particularly on a piece of land which, as you have noted, is going to change significantly and sometimes over very short periods of time. I don't know what the other members of the commission feel, but my inclination is to go with the recommendation of our agent, who has stated that this drawing is substantially, and the markings put in place are substantially accurate.
I think that there's opportunity here based on the qualifications of those present on both sides to hash out any questions that were raised in this report right here and now. To invoke 4453G over what I consider to be pretty subtle minor differences or different opinion on the resource areas is overburdensome and just simply not necessary when you've got qualified personnel on both sides present right here tonight to answer any questions that were raised. As I stated before, those two other resource areas, land containing shellfish and land under ocean, from town council says that if you approve this, ORAD stands for an order of resource area delineation, which is the outcome of a request, an abbreviated notice for resource area delineation. Those resource areas can be conditioned to be, mentioned as a condition that they are present. So I think that's easily remedied. You can certainly, request a revised plan to show those resource areas, which I wouldn't, hesitate to recommend. But I think that, given the qualifications of everybody here tonight, I simply don't see the need to prolong this out. It's a fairly straightforward application, and in my opinion, the differences can be hashed out tonight based on who's present here. We've got surveyors, engineers, qualified wetland consultants, so let's hash it out and let's figure it out.
Okay, with one caveat, I have not had the opportunity to review this site on site. I haven't been to this site in a number of years.
They submitted the application in a timely manner. I don't know.
Right, we, as the tribe was not an applicant, or not an abutter, they were not notified until late last week, so we had a very short period of time to review it.
Requirements?
I'm sorry, what?
Are you questioning the timing requirements?
No, I'm not questioning the timing requirements. I'm just telling you that we have not had that much time to review this.
The commission has zero time to review what you just
I understand, and I did give them a fairly thorough review of what I have submitted. I don't have any other explanation other than to say, looking at 3 plans, one of which is still technically part of the open record for this project, for the site, not the project, finding discrepancies in an existing conditions when no development has occurred, and not necessarily in and around the water areas, but up higher in elevations, I think is enough for the commission to question why the existing conditions have changed at all on this property in the past 4 years. That's where we're coming from that. I really do question how the coastal bank was determined between Transects E and Transects F. You've got 2 very different situations, and you definitely have a different scenario in that corner between those two transects. I'm open to hearing how that was determined.
Tom Bunker, BSS Design.
There's over several years, because we started this in 2013, the vertical datum being used was the National Geodetic Vertical Datum, and now we're working on the North American Vertical Datum, which is 9/10 different. So that certainly, if there is some difference in the labeling of the contours and the location of the contours on the site, that could account for some. And frankly, when I'm working on these, I can, get a little lost in those changes also. And when we did the plan for the bridge, was drawn on, some of that plan was drawn on the mean low water datum. So there are 3 vertical datum or data being used on this site, and that can obviously lead to confusion among just about everybody reviewing the plans. In general, I mean, I can say that in our field survey, we located top of bank. And that was, I mean, obviously you can see you're walking around the site on the steeper portions. You can tell what the top of bank is. There were more shots. You get topographic shots also, but there were shots, and that's why, the line does meander in and out because it's not a straight line, and he did locate, the top of that bank where nearly levels off. In some other areas, the top of bank doesn't always follow a contour. Again, in an area, if you're questioning in through here, where we have a topographic shot right in here, where we can see that a slope changed, and that is a different elevation if you're measuring on NGVD or NAVD. But that's, we can see where the slope changed, say right there, and it's steeper than 10-to-1, and even though it might be less than 10 feet between contours, with an elevation, a spot elevation right there, from there up to the next contour, even though less than 10 feet, could still be flatter than a 10-to-1 slope. Some of my people and I put a lot of time into, and my surveyor on site, put a lot of time into, taking these measurements and drawing on the coastal bank, trying to be careful if it's greater than 10-to-1, greater than 4-to-1, and what Amy had mentioned about the 12-foot flood zone. It's not really 12-foot, we might have had it labeled 12-foot flood zone, but it's the extra 1 foot of elevation, which would create a coastal bank if it's a 10-to-1. And I think we had a couple of places. I have that on here. Well, there are. Maybe it's on the other sheet, but there's, frankly, this even going up 1 foot higher, it's not a 10-to-1 slope going up there. On a area of this site, it's possible that we missed something, but like I said, I put a lot of time into analyzing all of our field survey data to come up with the best plan I could.
Now, this survey data was taken when?
So, well, starting in 2013, and I think it was 2013, and going, we were there this spring after the wetland flags were put out, and we took more survey data, so it's compiled over for more than 4 years.
Drew, can we see the satellite photo again? Sure. When you were walking the island, did you notice any evidence of disturbance, mechanical disturbance, man-made instability that is abnormal?
The only area I noted was where there was a perk test conducted, which there was access down here, roughly right about here, to make inroads into the island, to get to the area to conduct the perk test, which is right around here. So there was some, it was a small mini excavator. There was some disturbance to the coastal bank here. This is one of those areas where you can see some fringe sand along the perimeter of the coastal bank, where you do have some eroding coastal bank that is supplying sediment that to areas that could be considered, you know, coastal beach. As far as that standard for the entirety of the coastal bank, I would say it's not a performance standard for the entire coastal bank, but it could certainly be a performance standard for some areas here. But there was some vegetation disturbance. I was there the whole time for the perk test, as well as the health agent. So there was some. I did notice in this area here, and this, just so you know, this is a 2018 Google aerial, that there was some area that could be considered to be coastal dune, but it has grown over with a lot of shrubbery and grass, so it could also be considered salt marsh at this point. There was a lot of, you know, storm activity here that may have some eroded this area a bit from where it was previously delineated on previous plans. So there has been some changed conditions around the island, but, you know, by and large, it looked the same as the last time I walked around it. The salt marsh actually looks a little healthier over here in some of this area here. It looks a little more robust, but nothing really noteworthy that stood out as far as major changes from previous trips to the island. I did have a question for Jim, Mark rather, sorry. Just to get your feedback on coastal dune.
Sure.
And coastal bank performance-wise. Performance standard-wise for those areas?
Yeah, I agree with your assessment of it, actually. We saw that there was a bit of a, what we would call a hill or a mound of sand there, but it is now pretty well vegetated, so we included it as part of the salt marsh delineation.
Right.
And then there's that one pocket where you can see clearly on the aerial photo, it appears that there's some erosion, right in there.
Yeah.
To the right of that a little bit.
Yeah.
But that was the only place.
And what about the area of coastal dune that was previously, it was delineated on a previous plan, but it wasn't shown here? Can you comment on that?
That's that same southern tip.
It was right here, basically, yeah.
No, that's the area I was speaking about, where it's become pretty well vegetated at this point, so we include it as part of the salt marsh.
Okay. Would that change any setbacks, whether it was coastal dune or salt marsh?
Under the Wetland Protection Act?
Yeah.
I don't believe so, no.
Okay.
Nor under the
If I may, there will be different performance standards for that.
Oh, yes, I realize that.
Actually, they're more stringent at the salt marsh.
Well, we certainly at least have some commonality and agreement, I think, between the town, the community, and the applicant, that there is a missing resource area to be addressed, which is the shellfish area.
Yeah.
I think it would be prudent at the minimum to require that this plan be revised to include that resource area and submit it.
Well, I think our application did not request confirmation of that boundary, and the ANRAD process does not require us to include all resource areas. So
ANRAD's a new one on me, and I apologize.
that's okay. Yes, so for an ANRAD, it's not uncommon to ask for confirmation of only specific resource areas. So that's the position we took on this application. We want the 4 resource areas that we showed on the plan confirmed. And as Drew said, the town does not lose any opportunity or any jurisdiction over those additional seaward resource areas through this process, as long as there's some type of condition that notes that we're only confirming these 4 resource areas. Additional resource areas are present seaward of the salt marsh boundary, probably the way it would be worded.
And that statement appears to be consistent with the opinion of town council.
Correct. Yep.
Right.
Can I just revisit the delineation of the coastal bank one more time?
Sure.
I think I heard Mr. Bunker say that they had done field surveys of the top of coastal bank, and they kind of delineated it as they went along. Under the regulations, both under your bylaw and under the state, That's not how you delineate the top of the coastal bank. It is very specific. There's a program policy that's been put together. That's why they submitted these transects. And again, this is the area that was accessed previously on a proposed project. This is one area that we find that doesn't seem to have any substantiation. We think it's an important distinction to have the Commission have this accurately delineated and done in accordance with the program policy and with the bylaw regulations.
Now, how are you saying that what they did differs from the policy?
You are meant to put transects along the coastal bank where you need to identify the coastal bank. It's meant to be a random transect where there's a line that's perpendicular to the contours, and from there it becomes, those are surveyed, and then that becomes an exercise in determining where the top of the coastal bank is. It's not written in a way that you can go out and sort of field identify as you're going along. I'm simply saying that I don't think the Commission has enough substantiation to approve the coastal bank boundary, particularly in that location. There may be other locations where it doesn't seem to adhere to any of the program policy figures. There are 6 figures that they show in this policy. And I think that it's important for the Commission to have that information.
Can you help us with that?
Tom, can you address that?
What I said was that, we look where it's obvious, and I think you'd admit that on these where it's a 3-to-1 slope, it's obvious. But it also took topographic information, uphill and downhill from what we, all part of a topographic survey. And as part of this, we can locate we considered the top of coastal bank. And when he thought, the top of coastal bank is not always, we also looked at it as far as slopes are concerned. So we did use all the topographic information of the survey and looked at the slope of the land. So we did both. It wasn't just a field assessment of where the top of coastal bank was. It's both. Some are obviously, when he's on any site surveying, we will say, this is the bottom of the slope, this is the top of the slope, so it's easier for us to draw. But then additional topographic information, uphill and downhill, will tell us the slope of the land as it proceeds, usually in this case, further uphill. So we didn't sidestep determining it by the slope of the land, but we did, we get at the top of the bank so we can see where the slope changes, and that aids us in drawing the contours.
I'm not a surveyor, not an engineer, but looking at the flagging out there and looking at similar coastal banks in other areas, I didn't see any discrepancy. I thought it was pretty accurate. It went by DEP slope criterion policy. You're not looking at a lot of breaks in bank here, which those diagrams under 92-1 show how to determine coastal bank. This is, a relatively short coastal bank surrounding the island. And I really didn't see that it was off the mark. Again, I preface that by saying I'm not a surveyor. That's why we require professional surveyors to do this kind of work. I trust that their stamp means they know what they're doing.
My name is
Can we, Chairman has to recognize you first, Mr. Wolpe.
So I gather you would like to address the Commission?
Yes, I would.
Please identify yourself for the record.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My name is Bob Wolfe. I live at 84 Ponquan Plain Road, direct abutter to the island. And I know Mr. McManus, I've had the misfortune of being involved in this since 2013, various lawsuits that still go on. And although you have commented already that it's not relevant to this decision, I must say that given the history and the issues surrounding this potential development of this island, I think it's critical to the town, to the taxpayers, to get this right in terms of development on Gooseberry Island. I have spent a lot of effort, my own, my family, a lot of money defending the Gooseberry Island, the water around it,
and I feel strongly about the shellfish grant as well. And I believe that Mr. McManus commented he's not a surveyor. It seems to me that given what's taken place on this island and the importance of it in the town, in this waterway, and the issues that we have with the degradation of water quality, that we should get this right, and we should have an independent surveyor question Mr. Bunker's work. Mr. Bunker said that he started this in 2013, and it would seem to me that I would ask the question, why then is this an abbreviated filing? 5 years later, why do we need to do an ANRAD, which none of you have actually even seen before? And why is that the case? Maybe I'm a skeptic, maybe it's what I do for a living, but I feel like there's something to this, and I kind of feel that it's important enough for us, collectively as a community, to put a little hold on this and give an independent surveyor and someone to check Mr. Bunker's work. And I think that would be the prudent thing to do for this commission. And I think this should get continued until that is allowed. We've had many hearings here on many subjects related to this island. And this one feels to me like it's being pushed through. I can't say why, I just have a feeling that there's something to this. And I just want to make my voice heard on that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Not speaking for the commission, just for myself, I think we're all pretty aware of the sensitivity of this issue. We've been made very aware in times in very eloquent manner just how sensitive a matter it is to the tribe in particular. But many abutters have come forth. There have, as we all know, been substantial efforts put forth in all the legal fallout from the original NOI. But I do want to remind everyone that what we are looking at here is a relatively simple application. It isn't up to the committee to speculate what its purposes may be, but only to act on it in a reasonable way in accordance to the rules and the regulations that we work under. My feeling at this point, pending any vote that we may take or other suggestions that might be made, is that there doesn't appear to be a really substantial difference between the delineation that might be suggested by the two sides. Any difference between the suggested deviations don't appear to be very material to me. But then I understand why others might feel differently. Is there anyone else in the audience who has any comments or questions about this? I'm going to recognize the gentleman in the back first.
David Whedon, 53 Main Street, Mashpee, Massachusetts. Hello. I was wondering if it would be cost effective to, as a comparison, to request a LiDAR as a surveying tool to make your comparison to establish your elevations. Would the board consider that as an option?
I suppose there's a good LiDAR map of that area that's available.
I haven't investigated it, but I would assume there probably would be.
The engineers?
There's a lot of coastal data for LiDAR.
Yes.
It's just a consideration.
Thank you. Do you guys have any response to that?
I'll put some stamp on it as a PLS. Are you asking if we know if there's any LiDAR?
I'm no expert at all. A suggestion has been made that I don't know much about. I'm just asking whether you guys have any response to that.
Well, I don't. The question if I know any of the data is available, I don't know. I haven't
Okay.
that. It's a good technology. But there was an airplane, and,
All right.
to use the technology.
And I
call some mapping agencies and see if they have it already available.
Okay. I'd like to recognize the other gentleman now.
Sorry, I forgot to mention, I had, last week, I submitted a video of March 3rd storm, very bad storm we had in Mashpee here, with 2 bad winter storms. This was one of them. And the water levels on the island, I literally can look, I look out over the island and can see the water levels on the coastal bank. I submitted the video to Mr. McManus, I think it was last week, maybe late last week. And I'm hoping that he shared it with all of you. And I think the only reason I bring it up, I'm not a surveyor, I'm not an engineer, but I can tell you I would have been a little uncomfortable with the water level of that particular storm. And I think it's probably something you might want to take a peek at as a committee and look at that and send it to someone who is a surveyor and look at the markings on the island relative to that water level, which was extremely high. And that was without the breaching of the spit, without the rising issues we have with the water. But these are 2 videos that were taken that show very clearly that the height of the water level at that storm. I failed to mention that last time. I think it's relevant to this discussion.
Thank you. Chucky?
Well, first of all, I'd like to say...
I'm sorry, but would you identify yourself for the record?
Forgetting that nobody knows who I am. George Chucky Green. I am the Director of Natural Resources for the Mashpee Wampanoag Tribe. I was 8 years on the Conservation Commission, 9 years as a selectman. So the town, the tribe, they both have strong meaning in my life, but I have never seen an NRAD before, so this is my first one. So I really don't know the significance. That's why I didn't intend really to say anything. But it seems like we are moving fast again. And if there are questions, I think that the questions should be answered so that we don't end up with a long, drawn-out thing down the road like we did last time, where the same issues keep coming up and going down. So if we answer those questions, that would be right. We know there are shellfish there. We know that that should be a part of what we're looking at, just so that we're clear, just so that everything is clear. That's my only point here, because if we're not clear, then we're going to start this whole process over again, and then we're going to stretch it out to wherever it is going to end. I don't know much about this process. I don't know what's required. I didn't have time to do the research that I probably should have. I didn't find out about this project until last Thursday. That's why it was such a slow motion. But I do know something about LIDAR data. USGS has done considerable LIDAR work on the South Cape after Hurricane Sandy, and they've also trained some of our personnel in LIDAR. So I mean, that sounds like a possible good option to clarify everything, but I'm just concerned that if we move too fast, we're going to be back in the same place, and I would rather be sitting at home. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you, Chucky.
Thank you. Just 2 quick comments. I agree with Mr. Green. I haven't heard from the applicant that there's a sense of urgency here or a rush. The tribe statutorily or under the regulations doesn't get notice as an abutter, but is clearly an interested party and has been involved throughout the process, and it's been practiced to notify the tribe. The tribe has an intergovernmental agreement with the town of Mashpee since 2008, where the shellfish grant area was addressed, and that's where the license was also reaffirmed at that point. So if there isn't a sense of urgency, if you have another report, if we haven't fully hashed it out, if you need additional time to do your due diligence and review both reports, if the 53G process is too egregious because the applicant would have to pay for that, the tribe would speak to the abutters. You have more opposition. It's not just the tribal community, which are constituents in the town, but we also have abutters that have voiced their objections. We'd love the opportunity to be able to go out there, stomp around. It's my understanding the applicant hasn't allowed that in the past, but we're looking for more additional time. We're looking for more evidence and more clarification. And again, I don't see the sense of urgency here. If the ANRAD is unique and it's something that's permissible, and Mr. McManus is recommending it's fine. We're just asking for the additional time for you to be able to review things and also take into account the public comment that you've heard today, which is important to the process as well. With that, I have nothing further, so thank you.
Thank you. Well.
Well, I think this is a very, very difficult point, but at this point, what bothers me is that one of the issues not presented is this shellfish area that is not called out on this plan. I mean, that is the crux of the matter, in my opinion. The tribe has a genuine interest, a business interest, so forth and so on in regards to the shellfish area, and it's not called out. I think we need to call it out so that it can be so noted, so that it can be protected going forward.
Is that within our purview as a commission, even though they're only requesting that certain resources be delineated?
I would say it is in your purview, but I also, what Mark brought up about, his description of an ANRAD and the scope of an ANRAD is absolutely correct. I also ran that by council. I asked specifically if there are other resource areas present in a given area that are not shown on the ANRAD, does that dismiss those resource areas moving forward? And she said unequivocally, no, it does not. If you were to issue an order of resource area delineation, you make note that these resource areas are present. They just weren't part of the ANRAD. And that really, takes care of the same situation as if you were to require a plan to show them. I don't know the legalities of if the applicant, objects to something like that, to having to show, because they're already stating this is the scope of resource areas we want to show under an ANRAD. So I don't know how to explain it any more than that.
So we could condition an ANRAD, is what you're saying?
Yes. Your determination is called an ORAD, which is an Order of Resource Area Delineation. And in that ORAD, you can condition that there are other resource areas present that were not noted in this ANRAD. And they will be, resource areas that will be present moving forward if anything else is proposed in this area. That was crystal clear from town council. You're not losing out on anything because those resource areas aren't shown on the plan.
Now, would that condition constitute a finding on our part that those resource areas do exist? Or does
Yes,
that even...
You would, in your determination verbally, you would make note that these resource areas are indeed present around the island. And then using a template from town council, if you were to approve this ANRAD, town council says she would help to draft conditions that would make note that these resource areas are present even though they weren't identified in the ANRAD. She's offered her assistance to, craft that determination.
Now, the second issue, well, there's lots of issues, but the second issue that, I would like to highlight is that we have the community concerned about the accuracy of the plan, and we have not seen any evidence ourselves to suggest that the plan is inaccurate. The suggestion's been made that there should be a third-party survey, which we have a duty to the applicant as much to the community as to not make this an overly arduous or financial burdensome process without good reason. And the community has also said that there may be existing third-party plans, LiDAR, something I'm aware of, but I'm far from a subject matter expert on. Do we consider continuing this to give us a chance to look at whether or not this first question of the resource area needs to be mapped out, the shellfish, and give the community a chance to present a third-party survey that may confirm their concerns that there's missing resources that are not delineated?
I can't see the question of marking it on the plans, the shellfish, to be a significant issue. We've had it explained by our agent, and who has also talked to the town council, as well as having reviewed the regulations, I'm sure, that really just isn't necessary. We are in no means agreeing that there aren't any other resources as the ANRAD regulations are written. They have the right to ask for specific determinations. The second issue is the larger one in my mind. The question is, do we believe that there is a real question as to whether these plans are drawn with sufficient accuracy? And I think there's a certain reasonableness test we might apply to this. That is there any reason why any suggested lack of accuracy would be a real issue going forward? The comments we've had about the accuracy were very vague, and I mean, I haven't heard whether they might be off an inch or a foot or 10 feet, and we don't actually have an additional survey, except that our agent has gone out and examined the property. My inclination would be to say that we don't really have an adequate reason to draw on the expensive process that we could in fact demand that the applicant go through to get an additional check as the location of these, let's face it, not very stable locations. We just heard about a case where apparently the water was all but lapping up against these resource areas. Is that correct? But we all know just from living here in Mashpee that these sand-based structures that are in the bays they move, sometimes to a remarkable degree. So I have a hard time believing that we're going to see something that would be significantly more accurate come out of subsequent surveys. If this work was begun in 2013, I'll bet it'll be different now. There will be differences. You know, you might find that on average, the entire island has moved an inch to the west or the south or the north or the east, as the spits often have, more than inches. So at this point, my inclination is to accept the applicant's drawings.
Yeah, I don't have major problems with it, except for this one particular area, which I think is important enough for the town, for the tribe, and for perhaps the abutters to make sure that this one condition is so noted. And we can do that, from what I'm hearing from Drew, is that if we go to this ORAD process with legal counsel, making sure that we spell it out, that it would be added to these drawings, and therefore I would feel much more comfortable. And accuracy, like you're saying, the tides are changing. I mean, the sands are changing because of the tides and the storm situations that we've been having. So I agree that it's going to change, but this whole thing with shellfish needs to be spelled out.
Well, I think we've been told that the appropriate way to spell it out is verbally, that is in text, as opposed to putting them on the plans. But well, I guess I don't have a problem with putting them on the plans.
You need to make a distinction as to whether or not you just want it verbally expressed as what will ultimately be a written part of the ORAD, or in addition, do you want plans to reflect that as well, or do you want one or the other? You need to make that distinction in your determination.
That's a tough question.
Do you have a view you'd like to express?
Well, I think either is going to be put into the record that it's going to be delineated with the shellfish either way, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
So I would think that the text would be sufficient.
As long as there's a delineated, defined area, be it, I mean, obviously text would be the easiest way, and the conservation agent and the other concern, well, I guess the conservation agent's the only purview we really need to be concerned with, but if that delineation is sufficient and it's conditioned, I'd be comfortable voting.
Do we know exactly, I mean, is the area the entire surrounding water of the island?
I would say yes. I mean, from my recollection of Rick York's testimony, he said that all areas around the island support, have conditions that would support the growth of shellfish. I think specifically he mentioned soft shell clams as being probably the most, potential successful type of shellfish that would be, in this type of substrate. So, but I believe it was around the entire island. Obviously, land under ocean is around the entire island. And usually when you have, what I've seen on previous plans when land containing shellfish designation is put on the plan is you have two squiggly arrows going in opposite directions. This is land containing shellfish in the middle, which pretty much illustrates that land containing shellfish is everywhere around the island, or in the immediate vicinity of a given lot, for instance.
Which means that
the island makes this a little, obviously different when it comes to those types of labels on a plan.
But what that tells us, I mean, as long as it's all around the island, it's easy to describe textually.
Yeah.
So I think we can just.
It's extremely inclusive.
I mean, in the other bridge filing, it was obviously focused in on a certain setback from what was proposed. But I would say that, based on what Rick had said back then, he was expanding outside of the immediate impact area of what was proposed under that notice of intent, and talking about the entirety of the island as far as its capacity to have shellfish habitat. And marine fisheries also agreed it was land containing shellfish, so I don't see any ambiguity there.
Does the applicant have any argument with that?
I struggle simply with the verbiage that we need to put into a motion at this point. We've had an ANRAD and an ORAD and an ORAD. I mean, an ANRAD is consistent with an RDA.
You would, I mean, in your determination, you would just take someone would make a motion to accept the ANRAD plan as presented,
Okay.
And then, with the condition of the unspecified resource areas that, in the opinion of town staff, agent, and marine fisheries, are present around the island, as part of your motion.
I would take so moved for that at this point.
I would ask that you make a clear motion, please.
Okay.
Well, I'll give it a shot. I would move that we accept the ANRAD application as presented with a condition that the situation in regards to the location of shellfish resources be described as a condition to the approval.
And land under ocean. Land under ocean.
Land under ocean, resource area, land under ocean, okay. We'll fix it up.
And I assume what you're saying is that you want to see the agent get that templated by the town council.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Do I have a second?
No second?
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay.
Okay. It's approved. Thank you for all the input, those people who contributed to that.
Okay.
Opening the 627 hearing, Thomas F. and Bonnie A. Smith, 266 Monomoskoye Road. This is an enforcement hearing. DEP 432755. This was continued from July 12th at the request of the applicant's attorney.
I think it's probably just to give a kind of a summary of events leading up to it. So at the last meeting, which wasn't the previous meeting, the one before that, there were two enforcement pathways before the commission, and this was prior to town council's input. One being a revocation of the existing license for 43-2755, 266 Monomoskoye Road, dock, fixed pier, ramp and float. The other was, and correct me if I'm wrong or I'm missing something, please, was the requirement of a notice of intent to complete the project, review what has been completed of the project by a qualified engineer, and have the process basically start over. Right now, there is still an active cease and desist order on the project. No work can take place until your enforcement action is finalized. And those were the two options, from my recollection, that were, foremost in consideration at that time. So since then, town council has provided feedback in that The order of conditions have expired, and the commission cannot revoke an expired permit. It's just pretty straightforward. You can't revoke an expired permit. So that leaves the other option, which I feel is the best option, or the best enforcement protocol moving forward, is to have the homeowner file a notice of intent with proof credentials of a qualified stamped current engineer to submit engineering plans for what's been built, and what is yet to be built, which is essentially the remaining portions of the float and associated piles, and to inspect the entire structure for integrity, to make sure that it was constructed the right way, and submit a report to that effect. These are getting into conditions if you, once a notice of intent is filed and comes before you, so I don't want to get too far ahead in any sort of conditions, but that's really, the intent of this is twofold. One, to make sure the existing structure is stable and isn't causing any sort of adverse impacts to the wetland resource areas. And second, that the remaining portion to be built is done in accordance with those conditions that would be forthcoming if you were to approve a notice of intent for the remaining portion of the project. So, and just for the record, Mr. Smith has paid $1,500 in fines that has been received. So it's good that you took care of that in an expedient manner. It's appreciated. So I'll just open it up to the commission.
So if we could simply paraphrase one time. At this point, after talking to town council, that the only action that's really available to us is to ask Mr. Smith to file another NOI, okay, in regards to that thing, which would then take an assessment of what is there today, and then go forward with both fixing up what may be there if necessary, as well as the additional work that needs to be done.
Correct.
So that it would then be ready to be inspected and approved as constructed.
However, I assume that, it's up to us just what might be considered appropriate in terms of resolving the violation. That is, we don't necessarily have to insist that the dock be replanned or that there be an evaluation of its current status. We could, as was urged by a citizen at the previous meeting, I believe it was Mr. Gottlieb, require that the existing work be removed.
You can't. You cannot. That's essentially revoking the permit. I mean, I shouldn't say you can't.
I mean, they were placed improperly, so is there some reason we couldn't say take them out?
I can say with a fairly good amount of confidence that what's been put in place is exactly in accordance with the approved plan back then. Whether or not the materials that were used, as far as leaching, preservative, and pressure-treated wood, those sorts of things, I can't really speak to that. I can tell you that the footprint matches the engineered plan almost perfectly. So there's no reason. You would be very hard-pressed to come up with you would have to prove preponderance of evidence that the current structure is adversely impacting salt marsh, which is just a real stretch. I wouldn't even go there if I were you. But I think that, based on how many times I've visited the site and looked at the previous engineer plans from Cape and Islands Engineering, it matches up. I just want to make sure that, integrity-wise, because of what was witnessed and the installation of the piles associated with the float that they were being jetted in, I just want to make sure that, that wasn't the case for all the other supports for the existing fixed pier.
So jetting the piles in was a violation, but there's nothing now to be done to mitigate that. It could be fined, but it could not be fixed.
Right.
That makes a lot of sense to me.
Yeah.
So I had hoped that the applicant would come forward with some information as to what they believe would be an appropriate way forward. Can we ask them if they have done so? Let us.
You're entitled to do that. I think it's more your purview to dictate those terms than to rely on the applicant based on the history especially. I really don't see any reason for that at all, but it's your call.
We think we have a path forward. I mean, my take is that Mr. Smith is here this evening. We can simply say, Mr. Smith, are you willing at this particular point in time to go forward by filing an NOI and follow the steps that Drew laid out? If you're willing to do so, the matter is settled, at least for the moment.
Good evening, Mr. Chair, members of the Commission, Conservation Agent McManus. Attorney Christopher Crane, I represent Tom Smith. We are willing to go forward on the basis of what Conservation Agent McManus said. And, we're also willing to, as he said, suggested to do, the engineering of what's there to show this commission what's there is safe and is not going to come out of the ground or whatever. So, we've hired, I don't know if you've got the letter, we terminated the previous contractor. We've hired Beacon Marine, who I believe the town is familiar with. We also had Mr. Bunker go over to the project today. We're hopeful that he'll be part of the team going forward. So I think we have trustworthy people who are going to be part of this project. And again, we are happy to move forward on the recommendation has been made by the conservation agent.
Okay. Is there anyone else in the audience who would like to make a comment on this matter?
Is there any action that we have to do?
I think you should make a motion to require the applicant to file a notice of intent with engineering plans for the purpose of assessing the existing dock and completion of the existing dock.
Would the applicant like to suggest a time limit for that?
Well, I know Mr. Smith wants to get this project moving forward as quickly as possible. So as long as he can put his team together, I'm sure he'd like to be on, the soonest possible hearing date. So I don't know that the 9th would be feasible, given that he's going to get new plans in. But, if he can get in by the 23rd, he's going to do everything he can to do that.
Okay. Yeah.
I would be happy to do a 9th if I can get.
It depends on how long you can get people together and get all the information together.
But in view of the history in this project, I would like to have a time limit set.
I guess to be safe, I would just say that 45 days. It's 30 days to the next hearing on the 23rd. So just in case we miss the deadline, I don't want to have him punished by that. But I can assure you he wants to get this done as quickly as possible.
The agent has indicated that the situation is stable, so that I don't see where the commission has a need for you being particularly prompt. Perhaps we could say 60 days as a time limit on our order.
That's reasonable. Yeah.
Is there?
I'm sorry, I missed
60 days just for reasonability.
Tom Walker, you may be able to speak a little bit more about getting all the what you would timing-wise, what you need to.
60 days. Might be, we're all
with some flexibility and understanding, obviously, based on your
60 days
workload.
is probably enough to get a notice in.
Okay.
Right.
Good.
Thanks.
So I hope we hear from you again within that time frame, if not sooner.
Okay.
Do I have a motion?
We have moved that we continue, or we request the applicant, Thomas and Bonnie Smith at 266 Monomoskoye Road, to forward to us an NOI application for docks for both evaluation of the existing situation as well as a plan that can be approved within 60 days.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye?
Aye.
Aye. All right.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. I think we can jump back to
Clover Lane.
Before we get to that, I'd like to continue on the regulation proposed for docks and piers.
Oh, yeah.
I did hand out to everybody. I was just going through some of the changes, mostly formatting changes, but got section 1 jurisdiction, which states the local and state jurisdiction requires permits on all docks, lakes, ponds, rivers, inland and coastal resource areas, private ponds or state-owned ponds. They're all under jurisdiction. Grandfathered docks is information under section 3 about what constitutes a grandfathered dock. It's kind of a discretionary thing. Photographic evidence, evidence of a dilapidated dock in the water, evidence of Chapter 91 permit. Any of those would be good enough to justify a dock being grandfathered that doesn't have a local permit. New docks, pretty straightforward, all the requirements and footprint requirements on docks. Wording on the, after the performance standards under section 4A, there's 4B about shellfish constable comments and evaluation. And then you've got the clause under section 5, maintenance. That's just really, you know, stipulating what constitutes maintenance that may require a permit versus no permit. Railing and deck replacement are permit-free, with communication to the department, obviously, for that type of work, but we haven't required permitting for that kind of work. Basic maintenance. Anything that alters the footprint, increases the footprint, shifts the dock in any location, all of that falls under permitting requirements. The new section that has not been a part of the previous regulatory language is mitigation, which is section 6. Tried to word this in such a way as to not get too specific, because each kind of project, and it doesn't just extend to docks, it's also retaining walls, bulkheads, because I feel that those resource areas, and this is really just based on long-term observation of projects that have happened over the years, resource areas are most definitely affected by retaining walls and seawalls just as much as fixed piers. And those changes involve, you know, erosion, sedimentation, changes to water circulation, water quality, and sediment transport. And those types of impacts can certainly be exacerbated when you have storm surges and when you have moving ice cover. So those, you know, those are types of impacts that really should be mitigated for. And so this section of the regulation authorizes the Commission to require compensatory measures to ensure long-term protection and integrity of these sensitive wetlands and resource areas, which may include wetland replication, installation of native plantings to provide or enhance buffer zones, shellfish seeding, shellfish propagation measures, and/or monetary contribution to the town's shellfish propagation program, using calculations-based impact to habitat from introduced structure and resulting habitat loss. And that information is in, town of Dennis actually has a calculation formula based on overall square footage of structure in land containing shellfish. It spits out a monetary amount that is justified and linked to tangible information that justifies that amount, so it's not just completely random, grabbed out of thin air, this is how much you have to pay. It's based on sound scientific evidence and information. And then the last part is enforcement. I'm sorry, not the last part, but second to last part. Enforcement, just kind of going over what everybody is already aware of. Fines and cease and desist, things like that.
Now that last word in that, it should be violation rather than fine, right?
Each day a violation persists, notification. The last sentence?
Right.
Each day a violation persists after has been received.
I mean, we don't necessarily apply a fine, but it is another violation which we could fine for.
Yes, yep.
Just a
yeah.
minor comment.
Right.
By the way, I think that's based on impact to habitat in the
Yes.
previous paragraph.
Yep. And then the last section on the back page is policy for docks crossing town properties, and it just goes over the details. This is nothing new. This was already in the existing regulation. So there's no changes to that section.
But this is so much simpler than the previous. I mean, this is a thing that, it's a thing of beauty. I mean, it is, really is so easy compared to what we dealt with before.
I like easy. I like
Yeah,
things that are easy
exactly.
to read and easy to understand.
The only question I had about it, Drew, is I was wondering if, you know, if we're going to talk about a calculation, if you don't want to actually put the specifics in.
We can put the
I don't
specifics.
know.
It's something
just a
I'll have to
thought.
talk to Rick some more about that. We do have information from the town of Dennis that has a specific calculation formula, and we can certainly include it in the regulation. But I didn't have it all together for this meeting, excuse me.
Sure.
But
Okay.
I'll present it to you at a future meeting, and we can
In the
always
mitigation
amend
plan.
the regulation. But I think this should be enough for you to move forward tonight. But I would ask that you open it up to public comment before
Right.
you.
I had one other comment
Yeah.
before we move
Sure.
on to that. And that is just that I found myself feeling a little bit on uncertain ground as to what differences might exist between saltwater and freshwater docks. I mean, I know that in practice there are some differences in how we act them. But one thing that jumped out at me was the sunlight penetration.
Mhm.
I thought something like the 50% penetration was a standard, as opposed to the plank spacing, which is much smaller than 50%.
Right. I think it starts at 3/4 inch. It's in the actually under performance standards. The
It says
spacing.
coastal docks only, which I was trying to figure out.
This one, I think fixed piers under seasonal docks no wider than.
Coastal docks only.
Where does this? Oh, it does say coastal
11.
docks. Oh, I see.
11.
Yes, you're right. Yep. I think that should be for all docks. I think I would recommend getting rid of the word coastal and just replacing it for all docks.
But we're saying whenever possible. We're not requiring that at all for the 50% sunlight penetration. For some reason, I had the
Whenever possible,
impression
decking that allows for 50%. I think it's the reason for that, and I'm just speculating, is that not every company offers that. Like there's that, what do they call it, flow-through decking.
Right.
Which isn't widespread from a bunch of manufacturers. So you want to be careful about relegating a type of spacing to just a few select companies, because then you're really limiting the applicant to almost forcing them to buy a certain product over another. I don't know. I mean, I didn't write that. That's
right.
Not, I'm guessing as to why that was put in that way. It was worded that way.
That gives us the
Whenever possible, it's yeah. I mean, more often than not, if you strongly recommend that this area of a dock that's going over salt marsh should have 50% or more light penetration, the applicant's going to go along with it. But
well, I think another reason for that is that in some applications that makes the dock survivable in a storm. It's not just sunlight.
That's
it's
true,
also.
too. That's true.
I think one of the
It has
trade
seemed
names
like
is
if a
flow
dock
through or
is
something like that.
Raised up enough, usually more than 4 feet off the salt marsh, there's enough sunlight penetration
light.
throughout the day.
Yeah, absolutely.
That it does
That's what
not
I seem
affect.
to remember about the.
3/4 inch spacing, it's still enough sunlight penetrates through.
Doesn't the state regulation have more verbiage like that?
Yeah.
Maybe it's 50% sunlight
I think
coverage
so.
total or something.
There are some docks that only are like a couple of inches above, and
Right.
obviously nothing's growing underneath those. So, but yeah, I mean,
Okay.
yeah. But changing coastal to all, I think that's pretty
that makes
agreeable.
sense.
Yeah. Okay.
So the next step is we have
Public comment first.
public comments, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Are there any comments or questions from the audience this evening?
Hearing
Okay.
none. The next step is to submit this to our town meeting.
No, you don't. Regulatory changes don't require town meetings, so we did advertise this in the paper. You've
Okay.
opened it up to public comment. They've all been, the public has been duly notified through advertisement in the paper that this discussion was forthcoming. I think it's been like 4 or 5 weeks since it was originally introduced.
Yep.
So now you just take a motion to accept.
Okay, so do we need to do it again if you make any changes, or how does this?
Any additional changes, yes, we would have to do the same procedure again.
Okay, so we have mentioned a couple of typos.
Minor changes like this, I think we don't need to go through the whole process again. Changing coastal to all, for instance, that's assumed to be part of this approval process tonight.
And where you've already referenced the mitigation formula.
And mitigation formula to be added to the,
That's not
to the language. I think that's, yeah,
Okay.
you're fine with that.
And I would motion that we accept the changes suggested by our conservation agent to Chapter 172, Regulation 27, Docks and Piers.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Thank you. Okay,
Thanks a lot, Drew.
thank you.
Beautiful job.
Okay.
So we have a couple of other post-agenda items. These are enforcement updates. There were 2 enforcement violation situations that have come up over the last couple of weeks. First one of which is two properties, adjacent properties, one at 83 Clover Lane, the other at 82 Nick Trail. This is over in Pompanesett Village. These are side-by-side properties facing out onto Pompanesett Beach with Coastal Bank spanning across the two properties, which you can see in the photo. It's the house with the stone retaining wall and the house next door, which you can't really see. It's kind of blocked by trees, but it's both houses, and this bank extends across both. The homeowner is one and the same, owns both properties, and as you can see, it was just pruned from top to bottom. This was almost exclusively Rugosa Rose, so there's not really an opportunity for mitigation here because that stuff's going to grow back more vigorous and aggressive than ever. It always does when you cut it down like that. So I don't think there's a protocol. Well, I wouldn't recommend mitigation because it's just gonna, and it's a tremendous stabilizing plant. I wouldn't recommend replacing it with something else. So really, what my recommendations are in this particular instance is that the homeowner be assessed $300 in fines for each property for violating the conservation bylaw, and be required to file a notice of intent after the fact for vista pruning on each property moving forward.
Okay.
Now, vista pruning in this instance is really just going to involve one type of vegetation. So you could, it's not going to conform exactly to the way the vista pruning regs are written, but you can at least condition, that pruning is restricted to a time of year, November 1st to March 1st, and restricted to a certain height. So those protocols will still come into play. You're just dealing with one layer of vegetation here. There's no trees, it's all shrubs. But that would be my recommendation. $300 fine per violation, $600 in fines total, and 2 after the fact notices of intent, 1 for each property for vista pruning moving forward.
Who did this work?
That I don't know. I don't know.
I am Paul Hanlon. I own both properties, 83 Clover Lane and 82 Nick Trail. This wasn't my intent at all. I said I wanted to clean up the bushes. I came back from work, and I was just surprised as everyone else. There was a language difference with my Brazilian landscaper, who I go by Louis the Landscaper. It wasn't an intent. I like the privacy. I like the bushes. The good thing I can say about it is it all has filled in very nicely. I took pictures of last Saturday. And also, to that point, the other good thing that came out of it, I literally pulled 4 50-gallon drums of trash out of there. We were joking it's the Pompanesett landfill. No one in Pompanesett loves Pompanesett Beach more than the Hanlon family. We've been there for 40 years. My folks are still down the street. But beer bottles, beer cans, it was unbelievable. Hibachi grills from 1970. There was a dozen makeshift anchors made out of milk gallons, all thrown up in there. It was unbelievable. I filled my pickup truck with it. But anyway, here were the pictures I took as of Saturday. That's both north and south.
I understand that your landscaper was overzealous. The thing is, one of the properties you just went through a conservation permitting process very recently, and even if your intent was to do small-scale pruning, you should have understood that that required, at the very least, communication to the Conservation Department. Whether they overstepped the bounds, as far as scope of work, I think is clearly secondary to the fact that we just weren't aware of this at all.
Right. I'm not skirting my responsibilities.
Yeah.
So
those pictures were last Saturday before we got any rain, so the stuff does grow like crazy.
Yeah. At least you'll be able to see the trash now.
Oh, I saw it some more right after 4th of July. They left it all there. It's awful.
I remain concerned about the person who actually did the work. I mean, if he's going to be doing landscaping work in that area, he should be aware of the rules. And
he is now, believe me. I told him, I go, what are you doing? You're going to get us all kinds of trouble here. So, he knows.
Well, we need a motion. A motion is going to cover the amount of the fines that we have 2 instances here where unpermitted pruning was done, so therefore we need to issue a fine of $300 per incident or $600 total in fines, and that the applicant file NOIs, after the fact NOIs.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Thank you. When do I file those?
We have applications in our office, so you can download them from the conservation page. We can come in and schedule time to talk about events moving forward.
Thank you.
So the second enforcement issue involves 44 Little Neck Lane. Go back to this. This is Little Neck Lane branches off of Summersea Road. This is towards the end of Little Neck Lane. This was one of the worst clearings, violations of the Wetlands Protection Act bylaw that I've seen in my time. It's just an absolute denuding of a coastal bank, shrubs and trees from top to bottom. Pelican Landscaping was in the act of doing the work when I spotted the violation. Talked to the owner of the company. He had claimed that they were only there to remove some of the shrubs. Poison ivy was a reason given for the clearing, and a couple of trees that were in close proximity to the dock and pier. I don't know if that was what they were relegated to, or if another company came in and took out some of the larger trees, but I think it was about 11 trees total of varying sizes, completely gone from the bank, as you can see in the photos. All shrubs removed. I had Pelican put in a line of hay bale and silt sock down here at the bottom, because I fear with the rains this is just going to start smothering this salt marsh down here. There was also some bordering vegetative wetland shrubs removed down here that they were in the process of removing when I came up. So this is really egregious. This is and no communication to the department whatsoever. We never heard about this at all. Violation notice was sent out. We still haven't heard back from anybody yet.
Could you tell me approximately where 44 Little Neck Lane is?
So it's the second
left-hand side. Is it
second
up
to
the hill?
last house on the left at the end of Little Neck Lane.
Okay, next to the last house.
Yeah.
Okay, I know that.
The last house is the Osprey platform.
Yep.
This is the one right before it.
Okay.
So what my recommendations were, $900 fine to the homeowners for clearing of vegetation on a coastal bank, clearing of vegetation in bordering vegetative wetland, and violation of Chapter 172 coastal bank regulations. $300 each for a total of $900. $300 in fines to the contractor, Pelican Landscaping, and that the homeowners will be required to file a notice of intent for full restoration and mitigation of the coastal bank, including a multi-year monitoring and maintenance protocol, professionally prepared plans by a landscape architect or wetland consultant/specialist, project supervision and monitoring to ensure 100% compliance and success of plantings, and immediate stabilization measures to prevent erosion on the bank while this compliance is being achieved. Like I said, we haven't heard back. It's been 5+ days since we sent out the violation letter. That constitutes an automatic enforcement order if we don't hear back from anybody within 5 days. So that's my recommendation. This is really bad. I've never seen anything. And this is a very steep bank,
terrible.
which they have compromised now by removing all cover from it. Just not very smart.
Did Pelican share with you that the homeowner knew?
Oh yeah,
he
said he had ordered. Kate was the one who went out because I was in a kayak. She came out in the truck and she saw a bunch of plantings and pots in the front yard that Pelican was getting ready to install. The way he described it, he said, we're just going to revegetate the bank. I said, that's great, but you should have come to us first. And I said, we never would have allowed you to remove every single tree off this bank. If there were hazardous trees, certainly, the Commission's seen many of those scenarios and granted it more often than not. Nothing like this would ever be approved by the Commission, ever. And you can see from some of the stumps, it's fairly evident that not all the trees were dying. There was no evidence of any sort of deterioration or rot or anything. They were just wiped out.
Is there any way in which the contractor in this particular case can be put on notice so that.
Oh, yeah.
This was so egregious that.
That's why I
that,
mentioned their name tonight, and.
You're gonna give him a fine.
And, I did, I recommended a $300 fine.
And he'll pay that fine fast, but
Yeah.
to put him on notice that the next time you do anything like this, we're gonna take you off the approved list or
Well,
something.
he's already off the list.
Oh,
We removed
okay.
him
That
instantly.
That certainly fits with my
I told him,
experience with that contractor.
you are on the watch list now. I said, and because I know the owner, I've worked with Pelican Landscaping on previous projects. They're all over New Seabury at any
Right.
given time of the day. And, never had a problem like this. A couple of instances, small things here and there, but nothing like this. I was shocked talking to him. I said, the regulations, you're supposed to contact us when you're, doing work like this. This is so obvious. It's in our jurisdiction. There's nothing you can say to justify it. And it's kind of arms up in the air. I'm sorry.
Well,
and that was about the extent of the excuse. So
They've been doing that for years in New Seabury, and when they know that they're not supposed to touch anything on the property, do anything to the property until they get permission to change it, okay? And it used to be a regular occurrence. You'd chase them, mark them down, and the homeowner gets fined, and they get fined, and they just pay it.
Right.
And they just still disregard
Yeah.
for authority.
yeah.
So,
I would appreciate a motion to issue an enforcement order for
so moved,
with this 44
with the fines
with
that you have
fines, yeah.
designated.
Yep.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Thank you. Last but not least, we have. Are you here also for commission? Two gentlemen here interested in taking up full-time commissioner status. So I asked them to come to the meeting. We did have selectmen meeting on Monday night. There's been a whole change of protocol for new board and commission members, which is 100 times more involved than what it used to be. But it's still a good process, very thorough. But I'm glad you came here tonight. If you want to come up, just introduce yourselves and have a little back and forth with the commission, explain why you're interested in joining the commission and something about your
Under these
background.
new rules, we're supposed to interview them, right, under these new rules?
Right, but this is just kind of
This is
informal
just,
at
they
this
can
point.
just take the mic one after the other and
Yeah,
just
'cause
tell
we
us
have
a little
to-
bit, because there might be people out there listening.
Someone might
Might
complain.
still be somebody out there.
I gave you a quick introduction when I walked in. I've been interested in this type of work for years. I've been a commercial fisherman all my life, and I actually tried to get them to go to a weight limit back in the 80s rather than a trap limit. That way, in other words, you would they'd be able to control it instead of the state selling them tags to put more traps in the water. That was more or less the start of my environmental endeavors. I retired in 2000 and moved to the Florida Keys and took up fishing again, which I've done all my life. But it was the same thing down there, the way people treat the land and the water. They don't even have an inspection down there for vehicles, and they were more worried about pollution from cesspools and whatever. But there's vehicles running all over the road down there with oil leaking all over the road, running into the estuaries. And I've written letters to the state about that, and with no response. But I ended up joining the city as on the Code Enforcement Council, and did a lot of work similar to what you guys are doing tonight at the end of the night. And from there, I progressed into the Code Enforcement Officer for close to 8 years. And I've seen the same thing you people have been discussing, just cutting down trees. Down there, what they do is they'll cut the trees down and plants and build, and then take the fine afterwards.
Right, yeah. Pretty common up here,
Yeah,
too.
a lot of contractors do that.
It's actually in the, it's
Involved
actually in the
it's-
budget.
I've been
It's in-
involved
it's in the construction
extensively
budget.
in a lot of discussions and decisions on what to do about that.
Sure.
Okay.
I also belong to the Wildlife sanctuary in Marathon, and I spent almost the entire time on the Keys rescuing animals, mostly birds. And so I have a real deep interest in the environment and coastal communities.
And he's my neighbor.
Oh,
Neighbor.
Yeah.
We won't hold it
He's
against
the
you.
Watchdog of Noisy Hole Conservation Area.
Yeah, I'm in there all the time.
And you're a year-round resident, sir?
Yes, I am. We moved back from Florida Keys 2 years ago, and we enjoy it here. We've got a nice neighborhood, except for the fireworks.
yeah. Well, might as well get used to that.
Okay.
So you might as well get used to that.
Yeah, I guess so. I guess there's no enforcement there.
Not much. Not where I live, anyway.
Well, I just hope you consider my, my request to join the council.
Thank you.
I think
you.
have a lot to offer, for sure.
Thank you very much.
Yeah,
Thanks,
thank you.
Drew. Thank you.
It'd be great.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Paul Colombo. My wife and I bought a home at 35 Meadowbrook Road 2 years ago with the intent of coming down here full-time. She's still working. She's a professor at UMass Lowell. She's going to retire maybe in another year or two. She always tells me that every year. Well, one more year. I taught environmental sciences for 36 years, both on the secondary school level and in higher ed, Simmons College in Boston. I retired about 5 years ago. I'm a former Conservation Commission member for the town of Clinton. Also chaired that commission for several years and became their first part-time environmental agent. Since then, we moved to Leominster, Massachusetts, where I am currently a conservation commissioner. And I met Brad. We were down at the causeway at Monomoskoy Island, and we were doing some repairs on the osprey platforms that were wiped out over the winter. And
Shoulder to shoulder, pulling the rope to
pulling on ropes in the
suck her
wind.
up.
And in the conversation, I mentioned to him that I was a commissioner from the city of Leominster. He says, "Oh, that's good to know." And then he mentioned to me just briefly, a short while ago, that there's a vacancy. So I thought, why not put my name in? I'm going to be here full time. It'd be a nice opportunity to work with the community, as I've done in 2 other communities, successfully, I think. It's kind of interesting tonight to sit back and watch you guys deal with these controversial issues.
You picked a good one.
We've got a couple of good ones going on in Leominster right now, and that just went on last Tuesday night. But I would really enjoy working with you guys. I love this area. We've been down here, as I said, for 2 years. We boat, I clam, I fish. My wife loves walking and biking, and so we're going to be here for good, which is a nice thing.
Perfect, good.
So thank you for your consideration.
Thank you.
Great.
It's pretty serendipitous that we have 3, Marty Bregman being the other one who introduced himself at a previous meeting.
Mhm.
We had 3 recent departures, and now we have 3 candidates for full-time members, which is like absolutely unheard of in previous
It's
years.
great. It's been a while.
We would have to comb the town to find just
how do we
one.
interpret the new, how do we interpret the new guidelines, I guess? Do we understand that yet?
Well, I would read through them thoroughly. I think it's mostly just incumbent upon our office to facilitate the process and make sure that that we conduct the interview with you, that you attend the selectmen's meeting as part of their process. I think the thing that's different with our interview process, it was just me and the prospective commissioner. Now I believe we have to involve our selectman liaison, who's Andrew Gottlieb, has to be present in that process. So the whole process it's kind of the same as far as the order of events. It's more formalized. There's more, stricter guidelines, or stricter protocols when it comes to the whole process. But as far as, the order of events, it's pretty much the same, so.
But we can't just require that they can breathe and nothing else anymore.
What's that?
We can't simply require that they can breathe.
Right. Yeah.
Can you
have to do
fog a
more than
mirror?
walk and chew gum at the same time? I think you guys you've demonstrated a clear history and passion for the environment, and as well as Mr. Bregman.
This is great.
So
No
question.
It's great
No
to
question.
have that kind of enthusiasm and experience on the commission.
Agreed.
It's great. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thanks.
Thanks
I'll
a
follow
lot.
up with each of you I'm still learning the new protocols, so.
I would
give me
move for adjournment,
few
Mr.
days.
Chairman.
Very enthusiastically
Is there
second.
a second?
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Okay.
Thank you.